clock above the execution chamber struck midnight. The air inside Flatstone Prison turned still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Caleb Monroe, a man worn by time and silence, sat in chains, waiting not for death, but for one final miracle. The steel door hissed open. A soft patter of paws echoed down the corridor, and then, like a sunrise in a coffin, Bailey burst into the room, 6 years apart, dissolved in a heartbeat. As the golden retriever leapt into Caleb's lap and howled, a sound of joy, grief, and everything in between. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments, and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Flatstone Correctional Facility, Colorado, 5:14 a.m., January. Snowfall blankets the valley. The wind hissed against the iron bars of Flatstone Correctional Facility, a low-slung concrete fortress nestled in the frozen outskirts of Silver Hill, Colorado. Snow had fallen steadily through the night, covering the pine trees in solemn white. A bitter stillness hung in the air, the kind that settled deep into the bones and reminded you the world could be cruel and quiet at once. Inside the solitary wing, behind 3 locked gates and 2 silent guards, Caleb Monroe sat on a steel cot, staring blankly at the riveted floor. 38 years old, 6'2", with the square shoulders of a former Marine. Caleb's presence still carried the quiet authority of someone trained to lead. His once warm hazel eyes were dulled now, sunken slightly into the kind of gaze that only death row men wore after 5 years of caged routine and restless nights. A jagged scar ran down the left side of his chin, a remnant from a roadside explosion outside Fallujah. He rubbed it absent-mindedly when lost in thought. Caleb wasn't what the public expected when they pictured a killer. No erratic rage, no madness in his face. Just stillness and silence, since the day he was convicted for the murder of real estate magnate Daniel Harrow. Caleb had maintained the same 4 words. I didn't do it. No one listened, not the courts, not the press, not even the public defenders who passed him off like paperwork. All except Chaplain Ellis. Father Ellis was a man in his early 60s, thin-framed and gentle-eyed, with a white clerical collar that had frayed at the edges. He carried an old Bible like a doctor carried a stethoscope, not just for show, but out of habit. His voice was calm and never judgmental. Each Tuesday and Friday, he visited Caleb, not to convert him, but to bear witness to his soul. On this morning, as the snow pressed against the narrow cell window, Father Ellis entered quietly. The hour's coming soon, he said gently, sitting on the edge of the bench across from Caleb. I know, Caleb replied, eyes not leaving the window. Ellis glanced down. They'll ask you soon for your final request. Is there anything you want? Food, drink, prayer? Caleb didn't answer right away. He ran a hand through his dark, closely cropped hair, now tinged with gray. After a breath, he spoke, low and certain. I want to see Bailey. Ellis blinked. Bailey, my dog, golden retriever. I rescued him from a busted-up litter in Amarillo, raised him since he was 6 weeks old. Best soul I've ever known. There was silence. Ellis, never one to question another man's last wish, nodded. I'll pass that on. Caleb looked at him then. Truly looked. You know what hurts. Father, I've had every friend disappear. Julie, my family, all gone, and I understand why. But that dog, his voice caught. He would have waited at the gate until the last second. He deserves to know I didn't just vanish. Ellis placed a warm hand on his shoulder. I'll do what I can. Later that day, Warden Rebecca Hayes stood at the edge of the solitary wing's control desk, arms crossed tight beneath her fitted charcoal blazer. Tall, mid-40s, with copper-blonde hair pinned in a no-nonsense bun. Hayes carried herself like a former military officer, precise, direct, and composed. Her brown eyes, sharp but not unkind, flicked between papers as she reviewed Caleb's file for the 20th time. The request was unusual. No pets, she murmured. "Ma'am," asked Deputy Marshal Keene, a short, balding man with a notepad always in hand. Hayes sighed. He wants to see his dog, a golden retriever named Bailey. Keene's brow arched. Department policy doesn't allow animals into death row. "I know," Hayes said, but her voice lacked the certainty it usually held. "He says the dog is with his ex-fiancée, name's Julie Hartman, lives just outside Silver Hill. No record of violence, no history of psych." Keene glanced at her. "You considering it?" She didn't answer right away. She walked to the window, watching the gray light stretch across the frozen prison yard. "I've been here 15 years, she said. "Seen 22 executions. And every time, there's that moment, just before the drugs hit, where they look for something, someone, and most of them don't have anything left." Keene said nothing. Hayes finally replied, voice firming. "I'll reach out to Miss Hartman, see if she still has the dog. We're not promising anything." Meanwhile, across town in a cluttered third-floor walk-up, 27-year-old Maggie Reed huddled over her desk, reading a manila envelope that had arrived without a return address. Maggie had the look of someone always in motion. Shoulder-length auburn hair hastily tied back, denim jacket over a coffee-stained hoodie, and worn jeans with a hole in one knee. Her apartment was more newsroom than home. Stacks of court records, a half-eaten takeout box, and 3 half-charged recording devices. Maggie wasn't just a reporter for the Silver Hill Chronicle, she was a disruptor, fiercely independent, stubborn as hell, and born with a deep distrust of official narratives. Her father had been a cop, falsely accused of planting evidence and later acquitted, a scandal that shattered her childhood and left her with a quiet fury. Now, in her hands, she held something explosive, a photocopied case file from Caleb Monroe's trial, redacted police notes, witness statements, but most importantly, a yellow post-it on top that read, "You're the only one who'll care. Start with Greg Whitmore, the rest is buried." Greg Whitmore, the lead detective on Caleb's case. Maggie leaned back, heart beating harder. Something felt off about this. The way the file arrived, the language in the testimonies, the missing timestamps in the crime scene logs. She didn't believe in coincidences, not anymore. The sun had not yet risen over the snow-covered rooftops of Evergreen Hollow when Julie Hartman stood motionless in her kitchen. Phone pressed tightly to her ear. The walls around her seemed to lean inward with the weight of the moment, and her breath fogged against the frosted window above the sink. Outside, a light wind whispered through bare tree branches, carrying the chill of a Colorado January that showed no mercy, even to memory. Julie, 35, tall, with strong cheekbones and the kind of blue eyes that always seemed on the verge of either laughter or tears, hadn't heard Caleb's name spoken aloud in years. Her hair, once honey blonde, had dulled to a paler shade, often twisted into a messy bun to keep up with long days working 2 part-time jobs and nights that ended with wine and silence. Grief, for her, had never come in screaming fits, but in quiet withdrawals, the friends she stopped calling, the music she stopped playing, the dreams she buried in closets filled with cardboard boxes. On the other end of the line, Warden Rebecca Hayes had been firm, but not cold, Miss Hartman, Caleb Monroe has listed a final request to see his dog. We've received conditional approval. If you can bring Bailey to Flatstone by tomorrow morning, we can accommodate it. Otherwise, I'm afraid we can't delay the schedule." Julie had listened with lips pressed together, her free hand resting unconsciously on the worn leather leash that hung by the back door. Bailey, now almost 7 years old, lay curled on a faded rug beside the heater. His fur, once golden like sunlight, had grown shaggier and carried streaks of pale ivory near his paws and muzzle. His eyes, still a rich amber, held a wisdom that made strangers pause. Bailey had been with Caleb from the start, adopted from a rescue shelter, trained with patience, loved with the kind of devotion that never asked for anything in return. When Caleb was arrested, Bailey had refused to leave the apartment threshold until Julie physically carried him away. Julie crouched beside him now, fingers brushing his ears. "We're going to see him," she said quietly. Bailey perked up, his tail thudding twice against the floor, as if the name alone meant movement. The decision, once made, moved her like muscle memory. She packed a thermos of black coffee, 2 protein bars, and Bailey's blanket, with barely a whisper. She slid on her coat, clipped the leash, and opened the door. The wind struck like a slap. Bailey hesitated, then stepped out. He didn't look confused, he looked ready. The drive to Flatstone was nearly 5 hours. The highway stretched endlessly between snow-dusted pines and shuttered gas stations. Each town passed a ghost of itself in winter. Julie kept the heat low to conserve fuel. Bailey sat in the back seat, eyes trained forward, occasionally letting out a low whine that wasn't nervousness. It was knowing. Julie didn't speak much. The words sat too heavy in her throat. But every so often she'd reach back, fingers brushing his fur, whispering, "We're going." He's waiting. In a different corner of Silver Hill, Maggie Reed sat hunched over a desk in the Chronicle's basement archive. A room that smelled of dust and distrust. The buzz of flickering fluorescent lights above her was a dull soundtrack to her unraveling. The folder from the anonymous sender lay open beside her laptop. The name Greg Whitmore now glared from multiple case files, typed, stamped, and scribbled in hasty margins. Whitmore, lead detective on the Harrow homicide, retired 2 years ago. Commendations for solving multiple violent crimes, and, most alarmingly, 2 internal affairs complaints buried deep in the department's backlogs. Both involved evidence irregularities, both dismissed. Maggie didn't believe in coincidences. Her instinct was a compass shaped by a childhood of watching her father's integrity destroyed by the very system he served. She had promised herself she would never look away when something didn't sit right. Now it sat like a boulder on her chest, using her press credentials. She sent a request to the city records office for the full transcript of the Harrow trial and a formal inquiry into Greg Whitmore's disciplinary records. It would take days. Too long. Still, one clue led her forward. A name tucked into the testimony index. Lisa Connors, a neighbor who claimed to see Caleb Monroe near the crime scene. Her statement had helped secure the conviction. Maggie found her number through a public utility lookup. Lisa Connors, 67, lived in a retirement complex near Maplewood Avenue. A quick search pulled up an old photo, silver curls, a red shawl, wide, unsure eyes. Maggie grabbed her keys. By the time Julie reached Flatstone's perimeter, night had fallen. The prison loomed out of the frozen terrain like a buried ship, all steel and shadow. Armed towers dotted the walls, their floodlights illuminating snow like falling ash. At the gate, She rolled down her window and handed over her ID. The correctional officer, a tall man with a tired face and red knuckles, glanced at Bailey in the back. "Dog for inmate Monroe." She nodded. "Wait here." The gates parted with a slow groan. Inside, the air was even colder, the silence almost holy in its absence of wind. Bailey stood tall when the door opened, stepping onto the concrete with an alert posture, his leash barely strained. He didn't bark, didn't resist. He just walked, toward something he hadn't seen in 6 years, but never stopped remembering. Julie stood still as the handlers approached. "Will I see him?" she asked one of the guards, a stocky woman with a nervous glance. "Not likely, ma'am, just the dog. You can wait in the admin wing if you'd like." Julie nodded slowly, brushing a thumb across Bailey's cheek. "Go see your boy," she whispered, her voice cracking, as they led Bailey away. The dog paused, turning back once, just for a second, and then continued forward. Tail lowered but steady. The sky above Flatstone Correctional Facility remained an unbroken stretch of gray, the early morning clouds sagging low, as if mourning what was to come. Inside the prison's execution wing, the lights were already on, casting a sterile, humming glow over white tile and metallic fixtures. The air was frigid and dry, smelling faintly of disinfectant and something more intangible, finality. Caleb Monroe sat alone at the narrow metal table in the final holding cell, a brown paper bag resting in front of him. His last meal, a bacon cheeseburger with extra pickles, a side of fries, and a bottle of root beer. The fries had gone limp from steam trapped in the bag. He hadn't touched a bite. He wore the standard gray uniform given to death row inmates on their final day. His hands, calloused and broad, lay motionless on the table for the first time in his life, including during his deployment in Iraq. Caleb felt truly powerless. He wasn't afraid of death, not exactly. What unsettled him was the idea that he would vanish with the truth still buried. He had been told there was no delay, no appeal pending. The needle was waiting. Then the door clicked. He looked up, expecting a guard instead. Julie Hartman stepped through, her face pale, eyes wide. She looked older, tired in a way only grief could etch onto a person's skin, but still carried that same quiet strength he remembered, and beside her, Bailey. The golden retriever moved forward with careful steps, then froze. His nose twitched once, twice. Then he let out a high, keening bark, the kind Caleb had only heard once before. The day he came home from a month-long assignment. It was the bark of recognition, of joy breaking through fear. "Bailey," Caleb said hoarsely. Bailey rushed forward. The dog's paws slipped slightly on the polished floor as he barreled across the space and launched himself at Caleb's chest. Caleb caught him mid-leap, collapsing to his knees as Bailey's tongue smeared a trail of frantic kisses across his face. His tail wagged so hard it slapped the floor in rapid bursts, echoing like applause. Caleb wrapped his arms around Bailey and buried his face in the warm, golden fur. He inhaled deeply, as if trying to memorize every detail, the smell, the heartbeat, the weight. His shoulders began to shake, not from fear, but from emotion finally breaching the walls he'd built for nearly 6 years. "I missed you, buddy," he whispered, "so damn much." Julie stood by the door, eyes brimming. She couldn't speak. Her hand trembled slightly at her side. Standing a short distance behind her was Warden Rebecca Hayes, normally stern and immovable. Today, her face bore something else, an ache, carefully hidden beneath professionalism. The edge in her eyes had softened. Her hands, always crossed tightly over her clipboard, now hung loosely by her sides. She gave a small nod. 15 minutes, she said quietly, then stepped back to give them space. Caleb didn't reply. He couldn't. Bailey was in his lap, head pressed beneath his chin, whining softly like he knew this was something more than a reunion. Caleb stroked his ears slowly, his tears landing in the dog's fur. Julie finally moved closer and knelt beside them. She placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "I almost didn't come," she said gently, "but then I looked at him last night, and I knew you had to see each other again, no matter what." Caleb looked at her, eyes red. "Thank you." In that sterile, silent room, so often a place of finality, there was, for a fleeting moment, life. Real, unfiltered life. Not justice, not closure, just connection. Elsewhere, in a dim apartment filled with cables, monitors, and the sharp scent of old takeout. Maggie Reed leaned over the edge of her friend's desk, breath shallow. A glowing screen played grainy footage on loop. A dark alley, time-stamped 2:19 a.m. The night of Daniel Harrow's murder. "That's not Caleb," she said. Pointing. "Nope," Logan replied. His voice clipped with quiet urgency. Logan Burke, a wiry man in his early 30s with perpetual stubble and a hoodie 2 sizes too large. Had once been the kind of tech genius who terrified professors with how much more he knew than they did. Socially awkward, sarcastic, and perpetually sleep-deprived. He now worked freelance in cybersecurity and had a soft spot for exposing corruption. I found it buried in the archive logs of the station's off-site server. He said, almost deleted. Someone didn't want this seen. The footage showed a man leaving through a side door near Harrow's building. He was broader than Caleb, wore a thick coat, and had a noticeable limp as he stepped into a black SUV. The quality was poor, but enough to raise serious doubt. Maggie exhaled. This could change everything. Logan leaned back. "But we're out of time. You said the executions this morning." Maggie stood abruptly. "Then we do the only thing left. We send it everywhere. Warden's office, local news stations, the governor's emergency line. Someone has to stop this." She paused, jaw tightening. "Because if they kill him now, and this comes out after, we'll all be too late." Logan nodded. "Then let's not be." Maggie gripped the flash drive like it was the last beating heart of hope. Her boots pounded across the wet pavement outside the Grayford County District Attorney's office, where the pale morning light had barely begun to press through the city's haze. Her chest heaved, curls plastered to her cheeks from the drizzle, and her breath came in shallow bursts, half from exertion, half from dread. Inside this building, decisions had been made that condemned Caleb Monroe, but inside this drive, buried in old code and deleted files, was a silent witness to the truth. She burst through the lobby doors and skidded across the tile. Catching the eye of the security guard behind the desk, an older man with a donut midair. His name tag read Gibson, and he blinked slowly, taking in her soaked coat and wild eyes. "I need to see Assistant DA Holloway," she said, barely able to keep her voice steady. "Now." "It's about the Monroe case." Gibson hesitated, but something in Maggie's urgency shook him from protocol. "Top floor. Office 3A. Take the elevator." She mouthed a breathless "thank you" and ran. At Flatstone Correctional Facility. The silence inside Caleb's cell was interrupted only by the soft panting of Bailey. The golden retriever lay curled tightly against Caleb's side, his head resting over Caleb's foot as if anchoring him to the moment. Every time a guard passed the observation window, Bailey lifted his head and gave a low growl, the sound sharp and possessive. He wasn't going to let anyone near his person without a fight. Caleb sat on the floor beside him, legs outstretched, his back against the cold wall. He had stopped crying hours ago, but his eyes were still red. Julie sat a few feet away, knees pulled to her chest, watching the two of them with a mixture of sorrow and fierce loyalty. "You know," she said, her voice low and tired. "He didn't eat the first week you were gone. Wouldn't touch food unless I sat next to him and talked to him like you used to." Caleb swallowed. He was always better at waiting than I was. Julie reached over and took his hand. "They're trying. Caleb, Maggie, she's doing everything she can." He nodded, but there was a hollowness behind his eyes. Chaplain Ellis stood alone in the prison chapel. A narrow room bathed in amber light from a high-stained glass window. He was a man in his 60s, tall and silver-haired, with deep lines etched into his skin from years of watching men die. He had prayed with murderers, innocents, addicts, and monsters. Caleb, he believed, belonged to none of those groups. His prayer was quiet, whispered into the dim silence like a secret between him and God. "Lord, if there is justice left in this world, let the truth rise before the hour falls." Back at the DA's office, Assistant District Attorney Monica Holloway stared at the footage Maggie had placed on her desk. Holloway was a no-nonsense woman in her early 50s, with cropped blonde hair and a gaze that could slice through arrogance like glass. She wore a dark pantsuit, sleeves slightly frayed at the cuffs, and had the air of someone who had won too many battles to be easily swayed. But now, she leaned forward, eyes locked on the grainy footage. "That's not Caleb," she murmured. "That's someone else." Maggie nodded. "The timestamp places this man leaving the scene within 5 minutes of the estimated time of death. It matches the moment the cameras were blacked out. Where did you get this friend, specialist? We traced the original file to an off-site archive. Someone tried to erase it." Holloway pressed her lips together. "That alone isn't enough to overturn a conviction." "No," Maggie replied, "but Logan just cracked the GPS records from the precinct's old fleet system. In Logan's cluttered apartment, the man himself sat hunched over 2 monitors, dark circles under his eyes. Logan had been up all night, fingers flying across keys, bypassing firewalls and outdated encryption like a pianist possessed. There it was. GPS pings. "Got you," he muttered. The patrol vehicle last assigned to Detective Greg Whitmore had been parked at the victim's building from 1:48 a.m. to 2:23 a.m. exactly when the murder took place, and all surveillance mysteriously failed. That alone didn't prove Greg committed the crime, but it proved he was there, which he had never disclosed. Logan packaged the data and hit send. The email was addressed to Holloway and carbon copied to Warden Hayes and the governor's emergency legal team. At Flatstone, the warden's office phone rang. Warden Rebecca Hayes, still in uniform and sipping her second cup of black coffee. Picked up, she listened, nodding silently as her eyes narrowed. Her other hand reached for a pen. "I see, so you're saying GPS confirms Whitmore's presence at the scene." Another pause, and the footage shows a different man, not Monroe. "Understood. Yes, I'll initiate the hold." She stood up, her expression unreadable. Then she picked up her direct line. "Tell the execution team to stand down. We've been granted a 48-hour delay." Back in the holding cell, 2 guards arrived at the door. Bailey immediately rose, growling low. Julie stiffened. "What's happening?" The younger of the two, a red-haired man with a nervous smile, raised both hands. "It's okay. We're not here to take him. Orders just came down. Delay's been granted." Caleb blinked. Julie gasped. "Oh my God." The guard smiled wider. "You've got at least 2 more days, Mr. Monroe." Caleb looked down at Bailey, who thumped his tail uncertainly. Then he looked at Julie. "They're buying us time." Julie's eyes were wet again. "It's not over yet." The courthouse in Silver Hill buzzed with a tension that seemed to cling to the walls like morning fog. It was a historic building, with sandstone steps worn smooth by decades of trials and whispers. Its wooden benches now filled with lawyers, clerks, and journalists who had heard of the sudden motion filed at dawn. In the front row, Maggie stood beside Derek Langston, the district attorney of Grayford County, a tall, meticulous man in his early 60s with silver-streaked black hair, heavy-rimmed glasses, and the kind of calm presence that came from decades of walking fine lines between guilt and doubt. Langston had a reputation for fairness, stern but not blind. He had once resigned from a high-profile case because of a single inconsistency he couldn't ethically overlook. When Maggie laid out the flash drive, the GPS records, and the silent footage of a man exiting the crime scene who was not Caleb Monroe, Langston didn't speak for a long time. He only nodded, then requested an emergency session with Judge Eleanor Wexler. Judge Wexler, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 70s with skin like crumpled parchment and a tongue sharp as a scalpel, had presided over Caleb's original trial. Her reputation was forged from fire. She was both feared and revered in her chambers, with the footage on replay. She tapped one long finger against her lips, then spoke in a voice that silenced even the bravest of prosecutors. "This is substantial," she said. "More than that, it is damning. Someone lied to this court, and an innocent man nearly paid with his life." Back at Flatstone, Warden Hayes stood outside Caleb's cell with a file tucked beneath her arm. Rebecca Hayes had always been a woman of control. Her salt-and-pepper hair was always tied into a tight bun, her uniform pressed crisp, her demeanor professional to the edge of coldness. But something had changed over the last 48 hours. Maybe it was Bailey's growl each time someone came too close. Or maybe it was seeing a man speak to his dog like it was the only thing keeping him anchored to this world. She unlocked the door, cleared her throat, and spoke softly. "Caleb Monroe, the court has overturned your conviction. You're free." There was a moment of stillness, as if the words hadn't fully landed. Julie gasped. Bailey's ears perked. Caleb blinked. "I'm what?" Hayes stepped forward. "You're free, Mr. Monroe. The judge signed the release 10 minutes ago. The van is waiting. You're going home." Bailey leapt to his feet, tail wagging furiously, barking once, as if he understood every word. Caleb collapsed to his knees. Julie covered her mouth with both hands, tears slipping down her cheeks. Bailey jumped into Caleb's arms. And this time, Caleb didn't hold back. He buried his face into the golden fur, sobbing around them. Staff had gathered, nurses, officers, a chaplain. Some clapped. One man even whistled softly. But no one said anything to ruin the moment. It was too fragile, too holy. Across town, as the sun rose higher, Greg Whitmore was making breakfast in his modest 2-story house. He had always kept to himself since retirement, late 40s. Buzz cut, strong build gone slightly soft with time, eyes shadowed with something unspoken the past few years. He lived in quiet suburbia, hosting barbecues and pretending the ghosts of his badge didn't whisper in his ear. But the ghosts had returned. When 2 officers approached his door, Whitmore opened it with half a smile until he saw the badge and the name, Internal Affairs. He was handcuffed without a word. His neighbors peeked through curtains. His dog barked from the backyard, and for the first time in years. Whitmore couldn't lie his way out. The charges were read aloud at the station. Evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, falsifying reports, conspiracy. It was over. By mid-afternoon, the news had spread. Local channels aired the footage of Caleb's release. National media outlets picked up the story by nightfall. Justice delayed. Not denied became a headline, and one face appeared again and again. Maggie Pierce. She didn't care for the attention, not really, but when a local anchor asked her how she felt being hailed as the woman who saved an innocent man, Maggie said something that would later be replayed on every screen in Silver Hill. "I didn't save him. The truth did. I just refused to stop looking." A week later, beneath the wide-open skies outside Silver Hill, Caleb stood in a field of golden grass. The air was warm and clear, and a breeze drifted off the nearby lake. Julie leaned against the porch of their new home, a modest, two-bedroom cabin near the water. She wore jeans, a loose blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was smiling. Bailey bounded through the tall grass like a pup, barking at dragonflies and then flopping on his back to roll in the clover. Caleb watched him, arms crossed loosely. "He's finally free too," he said. Julie joined him. "You both are, in time." They would turn the nearby barn into a center for therapy dogs and training programs for veterans with PTSD. It was Caleb's dream, a place where no soldier, no dog, would ever be left behind again. Meanwhile, Maggie had taken a job with the Silver Hill Sentinel as their lead investigative reporter. She moved into a small downtown apartment with peeling paint but great light. Her desk was already stacked with case files. Logan helped her set up a secure server. She was already chasing leads on a wrongful eviction scandal, but sometimes, when the wind was just right, she'd take the long road home and pass by the lake, and if she was lucky, she'd catch sight of Bailey, his fur a streak of gold against the green, his bark echoing like laughter across the water. Sometimes, miracles don't come with trumpets or flashes of light. Sometimes, they come quietly through the loyalty of a dog, the persistence of a young journalist, or the prayer of someone who still believes in second chances. Caleb's story is not just about justice. It's about how God works through people, through love, and through patience when the world gives up. He doesn't. He watches, he waits, and when the time is right, he moves hearts and opens doors no man can shut. Maybe today, you're waiting for your own miracle. Maybe you're tired, confused, or feel forgotten. But just like Caleb, you are not alone. Keep the faith. Keep praying. Because sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one person, one prayer to change everything. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below and write Amen to stand with those who still believe in light after darkness. Share this video with someone who needs hope today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us. God is still writing beautiful endings. May the Lord bless you and everyone you love.